Guys, it's Shawn. Welcome back if you're a return viewer, and hello if you're coming in for the first time. Today we're going to be talking about the weighty topic of how do you fire an employee. This is probably not something you're looking forward to in your business, but it may be a necessity, particularly as we go into this economic downturn, which looks like it's going to be severe. More and more data comes in. It looks like it may be a very severe downturn. So we've got this very real reality, and unfortunately some businesses are going to have to fire employees just to deal with economic reality. You, of course, might be facing the desire to fire employees for other reasons. Maybe you have a problem employee. Maybe there's been a theft at your company. Maybe you just have somebody who is causing more trouble than they're worth, or you have a salesperson that's not performing. There could be a whole host of reasons why you need to get rid of somebody. We're going to talk about that process, try to hopefully keep you out of some hot water and make it go as smoothly as possible and simplify the process. So we'll give you some good tips today, really make it a little bit easier, safer, give you kind of a clear outline of how to get it done and manage some of that risk associated with it. As always on the channel, we like to say we don't give legal advice. I don't know your specific situation. We're just giving general pointers and tips. Consult your legal counsel. They'll have specific advice for you based on your state law, based on your location, based on more knowledge about your company. Also, we don't do financial or investment advice. Start by checking your legal obligations. And again, this is a great time to talk to your legal counsel about what are you obligated to do. What requirements do you have under state or local law? Maybe you have some requirements to pay out past sick leave. Depending on the size and scope of your employment, you may have notice obligations, right? There's federal law that kicks in when you hit a certain size. You have to tell employees in advance of a mass closure, right? So there could be different things that come in there. You also want to look at your agreements with your employee, both written and oral. And this is one of the things you want to generally be careful with on the front end, is you don't want to make firm promises. If you do this, I'll make you an owner of the company. Stay for 5 years, I'll give you ownership. These things can come back and bite you because you may have a contract. Now, depending on the employee, depending on their nature, you may have some kind of agreement with them. Maybe you, in fact, have a termination payout that you contractually agreed to. Maybe you have a deal that you worked out with your employees where you are going to pay them. We generally advise employers to be very careful about entering into those kind of agreements, but sometimes they're accidentally entered into. Sometimes they're knowingly entered into just because they make business sense. So you want to go back, check your obligations to this particular employee. You want to look at what's going on around you and whether there's any, state, local regulations that are going to play into this, but also what you've agreed to. Then you want to make sure that your process is fair. So one of the big things is, you're going to have federal, state, and maybe local law, which will have legal obligations as far as anti-discrimination, fair treatment. These generally come in layers, right? There's federal law, both the Civil Rights Act and then ADA, and others may come into play. And then you have, on a state level, most states have some type of civil rights statute, mirrors federal, but may add additional layers and additional requirements. And then you may have local city requirements that layer in, county requirements that layer in. So you want to look at that. But overall, you want to make sure this process is fair. You want to check and make sure that you, both in process and in this particular case, are not running afoul of any of those discrimination laws. This is particularly important if you have multiple people involved, right? Could there be factors which would be tied to illegal discrimination that are tied into the termination, right? Is somebody terminating somebody because of one of these protected categories? And you need to also understand that if somebody, has some of these protected characteristics under either federal, state, local, county law, you want to make sure that your file is really clear, right? You always want a good file, but if there's reasons that a particular person might believe that your company is terminating them that's somehow tied to some potentially discriminatory characteristic, you want to make sure you have your file in order, right? For salespeople, this can be somewhat easier, right? Particularly if you can be objective. If you have 10 salespeople and you pick the one that has severely lagging sales, let's say 8 of them are doing great, one's doing okay and one's doing terrible, and now you want to terminate the employee that's doing terrible, absent any other factors, that looks very good from objective standpoint, right? Like, we picked the person who has terrible sales. Now, what you want to make sure, and this is why you want to go back and check your process, both in how it's structured but how it's being executed, you can't just use that as an excuse, right? You can't say, hey, I want to get rid of somebody. Maybe you have a discriminatory reason for getting rid of that somebody, and now you go back and you find an excuse that looks good on paper, but your real reason is something else, right? So you want to check all that before you get into the termination process. Again, think about the law. This is probably a great time to consult your lawyer. What overlays do we have? What issues might come out? And how do we want to lay things out in terms of those laws, right? In terms of, whatever termination situations we might have going on, any of those legal obstacles, as far as, protections, to make sure that we're making clear that it's not for a discriminatory purpose, that our termination is allowed by law. We may also want to think about payout timelines and other things, right? Are we going to pay this employee on a timely basis, comply with whatever law may apply? Because sometimes there's provisions that say you have to pay an employee within a certain window of time. So you want to check with your state, and maybe that's also a local law issue as well. How quickly do we need to cut that final paycheck to this employee to make sure that we have severed the employment relationship and complied with applicable law? So again, a lot of layers of here legal, right? We're making sure what we did does not violate the law. We are checking what obligations are going to be triggered when we do terminate the employee. Make sure we're going to comply with them, because we don't want a problem after the fact, right? Once you announce that you're terminating the employee, the relationship generally turns adversarial, right? They're no longer your friend. They're going to be looking for problems, and that's why you want to make sure you're dotting I's and crossing T's at this point, because of the potential for a flare-up. And they may well go talk to their lawyer, and you want to make sure that you have worked with your legal team to have everything in order. So their lawyer goes through, the employee's lawyer goes through and looks at it. They're saying, okay, well, compliance. You want to have as much compliance as you can to give that other lawyer as few reasons as possible to potentially attack you. You want to document your decision. And here, you want to make sure that you are documenting within your company HR files why you did it. That it was for some objective reason, not tied to some kind of discriminatory or protected reason. And then you also want to potentially document it to your employee. Again, simple here, don't need to get extremely complex. For, again, a salesperson, it may be as simple as saying, hey, we are terminating you because you are underperforming as an employee. You have not met, you're behind all the other salespersons, and we have to, tighten up the team, increase the average sales here at the company, and unfortunately we have to let you go. You don't want to get into a lot of extraneous conversation, additional details, right? You want to keep this very objective. One recommendation a lot of people do is when they do the termination, if you're going to do it in person, you would send two people together, right? So you have two company representatives going to visit one person to carry out the termination, and then you would just basically deliver the news. That gives you kind of the advantage of not having the other person being able to claim something was said that wasn't said, right? Because you have two witnesses versus one. You may also want to put some paper documentation together that's very brief, generally, that explains why you're doing the termination, to keep things very clear-cut and simple. You want to execute clearly, right? This is not a time to come in there and be wishy-washy. You don't want to get into a negotiation over the termination, right? Sometimes people feel bad about doing a termination. They're upset. A lot of employers like their employees, right? And it feels bad to have to terminate somebody. And then you get into some wishy-washy back and forth language, maybe talking about what could have been, what should have happened. You want to end all of that discussion, right? From protecting yourself from an employment law standpoint, generally you just want to go in there, you want to deliver the news, you want to make it clear that the termination is done, you want to talk about next steps as far as we'll be getting you your final paycheck, whatever procedures for closing things down as far as getting the employee off the computer system, get them out the door. Different people do different things. Some people do accompany the employee out the door as part of executing the termination. or make them pack up right there under supervision, you need to apply some discretion there. I mean, that is good as far as the security standpoint, to make sure that your ex-employee can't do something terrible in their final minutes at the company. But from a morale standpoint, from ongoing relations with that employee, are they going to have a bitter taste in the future? And what do your other employees think? That is a very harsh remedy. So you really need to think about the security needs of your company, the levels of risk, and then also, the practical reality of ongoing relationships. So no clear answer there. The textbook answer would be yes, terminate the employee, immediately show them out the door, turn off their access cards, change the locks, whatever you have to do to make sure that you can't have a future problem. But then that's very bad for morale, and it also leaves a bad taste in the employee's mouth. So you got to have to make a real decision, weighing factors. You complete the task. You make sure that it is crystal clear that it has happened. The employee is terminated, and then you make sure you follow up with those final paychecks, terminating the access rights of the employee, getting them out of the computer system. All of those things need to be done. So you may want to involve not only the people who are making the termination decision, but you're also probably going to, on a confidential basis, have to involve a few other employees, IT, HR, etc., to carry this out. So you want a very small, confidential team, and you want a checklist, and you want to make sure everything happens as you planned. At some point, you'll have to communicate with your remaining team. You generally don't want to get into all the details about what happened and why you terminated the employee. If you did a general layoff for economic reasons, a lot of companies will come in and say something like, we terminated 10% of employees for economic reasons. That is a very straightforward objective. You don't want to really generally get into specific details about problems with particular employees, because then, you may open yourself up to exposure. That employee might disagree with your assessment and then try to, come after you for sullying their reputation, or potentially even claiming you lied about what happened. Better to be very factual, straightforward. You do have to communicate the termination with the remaining team, just because they need to know that person's no longer on a team. You don't want, members of your current team calling somebody who's been terminated and giving them confidential information. Maybe they have each other's cell phone numbers, they're working on projects together. You want to make clear that the termination is over so that your current employees don't accidentally give information, data, confidential stuff to the terminated employee. Again, that plays into the security issue as well, right? If your current employees don't know that employee is terminated, they might give data to that person. They might answer questions that they shouldn't answer. So you do want to communicate with the remaining team the fact of the termination. They don't need to know the why of the termination as much as they need to know that the termination has happened, and that they need to act accordingly and protect your corporate resources. Terminating people is never fun, folks, but it is something that is important. It obviously may help the overall financial profile of the company, may build the strength. This is one of them cases where sometimes you need to terminate one or two employees to make the company stronger, to ensure survival, to allow long-term growth. So they are necessary at times to get done, but it's never a pleasant thing. So you want to have a plan, you want to map the plan. We're giving you a lot of great tips here on this video. Would love your comments about what you're doing. Obviously, don't put anything confidential in the comments here on YouTube, but feel free to comment and tell us, what questions you have, what issues you see. Maybe tell us some war stories from your experience about what's happening. But we want to figure out how to do this in the safest way for us and our companies. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in today. Glad you're here. Looking forward to reading those comments. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and give a like so more people can see this video. Catch you soon.